South Africa's Minister of Finance has expressed cautious optimism that a deal can be struck with the United States to avoid crippling tariffs being imposed on South African goods. Enoch Godongwana says that informal discussions have taken place, with South African negotiators now having a sense of what the Americans require. SABC News correspondent in Washington, Nick Harper, spoke to the minister at the International Monetary Fund and World Bank meetings in Washington, D.C. Now, he asked Godongwana about the surprise U-turn announcement that he is scrapping the controversial plan to increase VAT.
Our budget is over a 3-year period. That 75 billion rand is over a medium term, over a three period. Let me say, you will recall that Parliament, in accepting the fiscal framework, made a condition that during the next 30 days, I must focus on the proposals that are going to be submitted by a number of political parties. And I did exactly that and looked at those proposals of the different political parties in order to find revenue sources to replace the VAT. That was the broadly proposition that emerged from Parliament. I have done subsequent to that, in consultation with this and looking at this proposal from these political parties, came to the conclusion that we might well find some resources with additional revenue from SARS, which at the time of presenting the budget, those resources were not necessarily available. Now, what that means, if that happens, we will reduce the current expenditure in line with the amount of reduction in VAT. Having done so, after the new budget with those reduced expenditure, we may then introduce a special appropriation to close the gap, if I may say.
Now, the IMF has downgraded the growth forecast for South Africa. How concerned are you about that? And are there plans in place to try and make up that slowing growth?
They've downgraded that on Tuesday. Okay? We were here. We have got to go back and incorporate that into our forecast. And that has serious implications for growth, for both our growth forecast and our revenue forecast. What will come out of that is difficult to tell at the moment, but those are the challenges that downgrading may mean.
We have a 90-day pause on the US tariffs at the moment. How are South Africa-US negotiations going so far?
My colleague who is leading trade and industry, I know he's hard at work consulting a number of us in government, preparing a proposal that I'd like you to table before the United States of America government.
And if a deal can't be reached in 90 days, is there a plan?
I suspect there's a possibility of a deal within that 90 days.
Obviously, we've seen US-South Africa relations strained in the last 3 months since Donald Trump returned to office. We've seen the expulsion of the ambassador. Do you feel that relations between the two countries can be salvaged, or are they beyond repair?
No, I take that as an isolated incident. Which on its own should not be straining relationship between South Africa and the USA.
And do you feel that there is a chance to repair things? Because Donald Trump has made it very clear that he's unhappy with South Africa at this moment in time.
Look, we are working from our side on resetting that relationship. We are quite optimistic that that relationship will be reset.
And how do you think that will be achieved?
I'm saying there's a proposal our colleagues from trade and industry that they are developing as part of that engagement. They have had some informal engagement and sense what the Americans require, and are making a proposal in that regard.
And Minister, just finally, if I could ask you, in terms of the immediate fiscal risks that we're seeing from the delays coming from an alternative funding source, if VAT is not increased, where do you think things go from here, and how much of a risk is there if another alternative viable source is not?
There's always a fiscal risk in these matters, particularly in an environment when you've got a constrained fiscal space. That risk exists. The question is, how are we going to mitigate it? That's the matter we need to now to go back and work hard on.
Minister, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.